Hey, I'm Fiona, coming to you from the unceded lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. Now, if you're a linear sequential person, maybe you're here after looking at theme 1, which was all about wondering if you're a spiritual person. We hope you enjoyed that. If you're starting here, that's totally fine too. So welcome to theme 2 of innerVIVID. In the first theme, Jonathan played with ideas about the S word, spirituality. What does it mean? Do we have one? How would I know? How do you spell it? Oh, no, we're good with that one. Across this whole series, we're playing around with some big ideas to sketch out a picture of what your own unique sense of spirituality just might be. In a way, that first part was laying the groundwork for all of that. From here on in, we're going to get into those big ideas, ask some cool questions, and see what our innerVIVID thinkers, think about them. To help us keep track of it all, we're calling the big ideas themes, and each question gets an episode to itself. This time around, we're going to play with ideas about beginnings. That goes some way to explain why theme 2 is called... Ever wondered where everything came from? I mean, the shop, or Deer and Bandy, or the ocean. Our answers, obviously. But I mean like the origin of everything. How did those stories begin? The stories that try to answer the big questions of life, the universe and everything, and where it all began. We know that research, observation and experience have given us good answers to many questions about beginnings. But how come every culture ever has come up with origin stories that resonate throughout generations? And why are many still so intrigued by them? Well, sure, there's always a super rational answer to most questions. Often, though, there is a way to think about questions that connect more with what we might call the human spirit, maybe. We like to think this stuff is crucial to what makes us human, both wondering about where everything comes from, but also what makes us, us. Whether it's big bangs, turtles carrying planets, rainbow serpents, or quantum entanglement, we love these stories. But this raises questions. Okay, let's do this thing. Another aspect of our spirituality? Beginnings.
Every culture has origin stories. Why are humans so keen about them?
It's really interesting, isn't it? I've got a pair of 14-year-olds and, that idea of the origin story of the superhero world is so important. Why are those characters doing the things they do? What motivates them? What draws them into the stories? What drives them to do the things they do? We're not that different, are we? And so when you're trying to make sense of your world and you think, why is that like that? Where did this all begin? Why are humans like we are? Where did that come from? It's a really natural question. And so I think the origin story gives us maybe a little explanation of that. But maybe I think as well in a lot of those stories, there is a sense of hope about where we could be. And there's a little bit of a sense of how we might be together and why we might live in the way we do. Maybe.
Well, I think we are, as human beings, hardwired for story. Who am I? Where do I come from? What's my purpose in life? And I think it could start with family, it could go to a culture, it could go to a national identity, but we want to know where we belong, where we came from.
I actually really love this question, right? Why are we interested in stories about where we come from and who we are? And I think stories are really important to us. They're our ways of communicating who we are to the world and who we choose to be in the world, but also where we come from. And I believe we're not just individuals who make our own sense of self, but actually we're an interwoven of many stories. Stories of our parents, stories of our siblings, stories of our friends, stories from our workplaces, school life. And then we have our own stories, our own perspective and our own view on all of that. And it's interwoven into this really rich, tapestry is often like an analogy that you use.
We all like to know where we come from, I think. One of the saddest parts of my life is that I knew where I came from, but for a lot of the time I didn't realise I was actually an Aboriginal. My grandmother, out of fear and other things, didn't hide the fact, but just didn't sort of let everybody know. And so we were all brought up as white kids. But I've been finding out over the last 30 or 40 years just where I come from, people who know me, and, they'll say to me, oh, I know you, I know your family, that sort of stuff. So that is a yearning that's been inside me. I think a lot of people have that yearning as to where they come from. Yeah.
We understand ourselves through stories, but I think we also want to tell stories. We want to share ourselves with others and for others to see us through the stories we tell.
Well, our origins tell us where we come from, who we are now, and who our ancestors are, and who are we today. And so me saying I'm from Sudan always give me a satisfaction that I'm from Sudan, and this is how I identify as a Sudanese. And so origins always tell about their story, and our stories make us who we are. And always we just pass down our stories to our children, our grandchildren, and so that is how they get to know who they are, where they come from. And so that's the beauty of the origin.
Well, I think humans are keen about stories. I think it's how we understand who we are and what we are and why we are. And that extends to origin stories. They help us have an understanding of what our purpose is. I think they actually help us connect with three things that are really important. They help us understand how we belong. They help us understand how we are to behave. And they give us an inclination as to what it is that we believe, what are our deepest values.
There's a lot to unpack there. Belong, behave and believe. You can see that Ruth's got an idea of how these family origin stories are sort of microcosms of the bigger picture of origin stories for whole cultures and even planets. Now, we've collected ideas about why we tell stories about humanity and ideas about why we tell our own stories. Now, I love Erica's image of our lives as tapestries of stories we hear and tell, and that we continually place ourselves inside those tapestries. So rich and visual. Is there a sense that we are our stories? Is that too weird? Maybe we can check out what role memory plays in all of our thinking about beginnings. But what do you think, Peter?
Humans are really keen on origin stories because we have the gift of memory and we understand the linearity of time. And because we know that, we also need to know how we connect back to the beginning of our own life. So we have lovely stories about our family of origin and all of that sort of stuff. And then we ask the bigger question, okay, so where did Granny come from, da 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 da, and you end up having to go all the way back to the beginning of time. And so we have to have some story that we tell about the beginning of time. And so every culture ends up having one because without it, we would feel rudderless. We would feel out of time, quite literally.
Thanks for that, Peter. It makes sense to me that most of us really would prefer to feel centered, located, ruddered. What is the opposite of rudderless? With rudder? Anyway, so maybe humanity's fascination with origin stories is about getting a sense of where we've been, where we're going, about making sense of being in the middle of living life. What do you reckon, PK?
Origins are ultimately a mystery, ultimately beyond knowing. And I would say that origin stories function as a way of human beings coping with the fact that we've just been thrown into the middle of things and we have to make sense of things. At their best, I would say that origin stories are about actually preserving the mystery of origins. They're not ultimately about providing a lockdown explanation of everything, but about bringing us into the mystery of beginnings and where it all comes from. So to take an example from the Bible, the kind of creation story in the book of Genesis, I would say, at least in part, functions this way. So for instance, the creation story in the book of Genesis never answers the question, why did God create everything? It doesn't actually give you an answer to that question. It simply tells the story of creation and lets that sort of mystery resonate. So, and I would say that's what kind of origin stories at their best do. They actually allow us to engage the mystery of things. But origin stories can also be problematic. That origin stories can be about explaining who's in charge and why they're in charge. It can be about explaining why things the way that they are and why they shouldn't change. And in that sense, origin stories can serve a problematic role. So feminist thinkers for a long time have questioned and critiqued how origin stories often get put to use, for instance, in sort of explaining and justifying, a patriarchal ordering of society, for example. But at their best, they are ways of actually holding open the mystery of being in the middle of things.
The good thing is, these stories are helpful to us until they aren't. It can be hard to challenge an ingrained origin story, but in the end, you are in charge of what makes meaning for you. You can change as you grow. Apparently that can happen. I wonder what origin stories form part of your tapestry. Would you consider checking in on what origin stories show up in your life? Maybe there's stories about family businesses or moving from one country to a new life in a new place. Maybe the origin stories that influence your world are about nationality or about a religious figure or the story of your family or your community. Maybe the beginnings that take up your brain space at the moment are new starts, relationships, jobs, dream projects. If origin stories served up to you are helpful, go with them. There are so many from different faiths, from different cultures, maybe like Anzac Day in Australia or Black Friday cyber sales. Oh no, wait, that might not be one. Anyway, for me, I hold on to some stories from my family life, some from my culture, and some from my own journey of my spirituality. And they form part of my foundations, part of who I am, and that works for me. How about you? What origin stories are part of you? Or what origin stories could be?